Jonah also received a call to go to the people of Nineveh and just talk about, or just speak the message, the impending judgment upon them. But Jonah, because Ninevites were the enemies of Israel, he didn't want to go. So even though he received a calling from the Lord, he said, I'm not going. So he went the other way. He was running away from his call. And Elijah is doing exactly the same thing here. He had a call from the Lord, but he said, you know what? It's just too terrible. I just cannot take this anymore. I'm running away from my call. You know, what's really important, something that we need to note in this passage, is frustrations and discouragements in life were not enough for Elijah to be excused from his calling. Just because there were a lot of hardships, just because things are not working out the way he had imagined, just because the life is just so hard for him, there was so much frustration and discouragements, that didn't excuse him from carrying out his calling. Neither do these things in life excuse us from God's calling in our lives. Just because we are having a tough time, just because we don't feel up to that, doesn't excuse us from the purpose and the calling that God gives to us. Just because we are so discouraged, just because it seems like there is no fruit, just because there seems like there is no visible fruit happening, and we should just walk away from it. Here, God appears, the Lord appears to Elijah. And as he passes, as his glory passes, there's all these fireworks, right? The wind, earthquake, and fire. But the Lord was not in it. After all these fireworks, there comes a low whisper. A gentle whisper comes. Sometimes when we read this passage, people tend to focus on the mode of God speaking to Elijah. And I know I talked about that last week, that God spoke to him in a gentle whisper. But what we really need to notice here is that Elijah hasn't really changed at this moment. He was still sulking in his "it's terrible" whining mode. The point is not how God speaks, because he will speak in however way he wishes to speak. And the point of this passage is not really the mode of communication, but the message he communicated. God is saying, Elijah, I know you are discouraged, you are frustrated, but do not give up, or do not give in. You need to trust me and follow me in all circumstances. You heard my call before, so guess what, Elijah? I am recommissioning you. And I think this message that God gave to Elijah is relevant to us all. God has called each and every one of us to glorify him. But discouragements and frustrations have set in along the way, and we are tempted to crawl into our caves. And we kind of just feel sorry for ourselves. And we say, it's just too tough. School is too tough. Job is too tough. Life is too tough. Being a Christian in this world, it's just too tough. I just want to give in. I just want to give up. I just want to just crawl into my cave. But God would have none of it. What God told Elijah is, when he was going through all this and complaining to God about how nobody's doing anything, there is no fruit in his ministry, he calls him again. And he says in verse 15, go back the way you came. And the Lord said to him, go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus. He's saying, go back to your way. Go back the way you came, because you still have a calling. You have a purpose in life for which I have created you. So Elijah receives, he gets recommissioned from God after all this complaining and discouragement and frustrations in his life. God says, I still have a calling for you. You know, this passage is really, so it's not so much about the mode of God speaking, but it's really a call story. Because Elijah was called by God to serve him. And now he's being called again. And isn't that really the story of our lives? That God calls us, and we respond at some point in the past. But then what happens? Life happens. Things get tough. And we want to just throw in the towel. I say, God, it's terrible. Nothing's happening. It's too hard. I just want to give up. You see, God does not give up on Elijah, and God does not give up on us. He calls us again and again and again. Even in the depth of our discouragements, when things are too tough, still God calls us again. And another reminder that God gives to Elijah is that you are not alone. One of the things that he complained about is, you know what, of all the people in Israel, I am the only one. Everybody turned to Baal. They don't really care about you, and I am the only one who's really serious about you, he complains. That's why I'm so discouraged, because I just cannot make this on my own, but everywhere I look, I'm the only one. But God reminds him that he's not alone. In verse 18, yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not yet bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him. That there are other people who will shoulder what we are doing it together. There are people who do care. There are people who really just care, who want to really live for God and serve him. Sometimes when we go through discouragements, it's because we feel like we are the only ones. No one else really is caring. No one else really is doing anything. But you see, God reminds us. That's how Elijah felt. He's the only prophet. He's the only one that was faithful. He was the only one doing the will of God, and said, I just can't do this anymore by myself. You are not alone. There are people. And usually it's the call of God that gives us purpose, direction, and passion in life. If we really know what God wants us to do. Sometimes, we say, hey, so what does God want me to do? Like, tell me, does he want me to be a doctor? Does he want me to go into this particular field? That's not what I am talking. I'm not really talking about a specific thing. But if we really are faithful to God in the revealed will that we find in the scriptures, being faithful to him, walking with him, spending time with him, loving him, serving him, and glorifying him with everything that we have, every resource we have, if we use it to honor God and to worship him, glorify him, I think as we walk with him, that he will open doors for us to walk through. And that you may be able to just figure out a little more specific calling in your life. But if you say, well, unless I really know for sure what exactly he wants me to do, well, I'm lost. I don't know what to do. Yes, you do. God has called us to love him. God has called us to serve him. So you look for opportunities where you can be faithful to God. You look and you search for ways to be faithful to him. The great prophet Elijah was human, just like us. He went through ups and downs, the up and down experience of life, just like us. He was no different. Even though he was the man in the Old Testament, he also had these ups and downs. It's just still it's hard for me to really grasp. I mean, for me, if I had just an amazing power that I experienced in the Mount Carmel, and just the fire of God and the rain coming through, through the prayer, I would be like so on spiritual high. I really had a hard time relating to Elijah, and yet but it just tells us that Elijah was human just like us. And guess what? He's also had it's terrible moments. Things are too hard for me, God. I'd rather die than continue living. But that's what makes, because of the human frailty, the failure, and that's what makes the grace of the second calling so meaningful. That God still wants to use him after all these discouraging moments, after his just being a failure, a spectacular failure, that God still calls him, even if he feels not up to it. He's not worthy enough for it. You know, there was a time like it was relatively like the beginning of this ministry here when we first came here. There was a time when we started this EM service, and then there were so few people, and then so there was some time when it was like handful, just like I could just count them with my one hand. So there was a time when I was very discouraged. I was like, oh my goodness, I just don't think I'm cut out for this. What can I do? Like, it seems like nothing is happening. No one, really, it seems like not many people really care. So, I was very discouraged. There was a time when I was very discouraged, and maybe this is not, I'm just not cut out for this, and maybe I should just like consider like transitioning or something like that. And it was a very difficult time. But then, one time God really spoke to me, and actually this was the passage that he reminded me with. Because I found myself, as I was praying one time, there was this group of people that were praying for me. They didn't really know the situation that I was in, but as I was just praying, actually this passage just came to me so clearly, and I just saw myself in Elijah sulking in the cave. Oh, it's terrible. It's terrible. It's terrible. But God reminded me, I'm going to just recommission you. I'm going to give you a call. Yes, you are discouraged. I know you are discouraged. You feel like throwing in the towel. But I am giving you another purpose. I am recommissioning you. And that time, that was a turnaround time for me. Not that the ministry all of a sudden just like had a 180 degrees or anything like that. And we are still working, to just go in the right way. But that was a crucial time in my life. It was an important moment. And God reminded me, and God recommissioned me through this passage. And so as we just turn to the Lord in our own lives too, I don't know what you exactly are going through and what its terrible moments are, but he knows. Even in the midst of our discouragements and frustrations, God is once again calling us. I know your failures. I know you want to give up, but I am with you. I still have a calling. I still have a purpose for you. Trust me. Continue to walk with me. And may that be our response as we hear him, as he speaks to us and as he calls us again and again and again, even after failures, even after discouragements, that we would turn to him. Let's pray.